What is up? Welcome to the American Peloton. I'm gonna have to edit that out for the audio, but welcome to the American Peloton. I'm Jonathan Crane. I'm a mediocre Cat 2 bike racer out of Birmingham, Alabama.
And I'm Ben, head coach at Skyway Cycling, former elite-ish mountain biker, and current team director for Skyway Cycling, presented by Domestique Coffee.
And we have got a lot to talk about this week. We're talking about American bike racing of all stripes, specifically a lot of crit racing for sure. We're live on YouTube. We're also on all of the podcast platforms now. But we're doing these shows live on YouTube right now, and we got a comment from Matt that he loves that we get right into it. So let's get right into it, I guess. Racing is happening. We're racing bikes in America, especially the Southeast. This is where, we're Southeastern based, and this part of the year is where that's an advantage, I think.
Yeah, like we had like 2 or 3 races in the Southeast alone this week, and they're all like so close together that people had to like decide which one they were gonna do, and like it's always a big decision every year.
So that's getting to a point I was gonna make a little bit early, but I think that's gonna be something we see running throughout this season. Like this one, so we had this is our boy Zach above us won the Cat 3 race at Sumatanga. I was driving the lead car for that because I'm still injured. Ben was in the race. Ben, how was the race?
The race was surprisingly hard. So last year we did the Pro 123, and Jonathan, you were able to race it with us, and it was a lot more smooth. Like once brakes kind of started going, like because there was more team dynamic, it was kind of more smooth. The 3-4 this weekend was really hard. There were attacks from lap 1, like dangerous moves going in lap 2. We had to work as a team to really pull stuff back, and it was pretty hard. I think my normalized power was close to 4 watts per kilo for 2.5 hours, which nowadays
that's a lot for a 3-4.
Yeah, for a 3-4, that's a lot, and especially as someone who like has a job and owns a business, like 4 watts per kilo for 2.5 hours, like right at the limit. And
yeah,
like most guys
serious.
at the end of the race, like couldn't even sprint. Like it was almost just like a drag.
Yeah, people are always cracked. That race, it finishes with an uphill sprint that's uphill for like this is Camp Sumatanga outside Birmingham, Alabama. It's about 45 minutes outside Birmingham, but traditionally it draws some bigger riders. I've seen like Novo Nordisk show up to this.
Yep.
A lot of people use it. I want to say maybe Givens did it one year when he was living in when he was living in Athens in the winter. You see people like that who just are around the South showing up. This year we didn't see that so much. But yeah, it's got a little bit of an uphill kick to the finish, so it ends up being a very slow sprint.
Well, and there's a chip seal portion, which like if you're not from the South, you don't know what chip seal is. It's basically like if you take a gravel road, pour a little bit of concrete over it, and call it a road.
It's like gravel that's glued together. It's like big, like golf ball size pieces of gravel that someone just like put a little Elmer's glue in the middle. It's a really crazy surface.
Yeah, and so like the ending of that race, the last 3K is chip seal, and it's like rolling chip seal, and then it's uphill for like a K to the line. So it's like a super hard finish, and it's
pretty
really
brutal.
hard to control. It's
the weather is always horrible. They postponed the start 2 hours because it would have been like below freezing at the start, even though this is Alabama.
Right.
It's a little early.
Last year we got lucky because it was like mid-50s, and all you had to wear was like arm warmers maybe. This year's a little colder. It wasn't terrible. Like thankfully they postponed the start. But
I've told this story before, but I once took off full length leg warmers in the middle of this race. Like I went to the back of the pack, rolled my leg warmer down, and then like rolled each one down, like coasting at the back, unclipped a foot, reached down and pulled it off, put it in my pocket, and did both of them without getting dropped. Because it's always super cold at the start, and then it warms up all day.
That's super hard to do because there's like no coasting on that course either. Like
yeah.
That's impressive.
It's basically between the chip seal and the start finish. That was my cheat code for like a place to get that done. But you're under the gun. I bet to make a little bit of a transition here into something that's like wider than our own scope. Although congratulations to Zach, and he's got a race with me in the Cat Twos now. I think that was enough points for him to have to cat up. It's
Um,
fun to drive the car.
I think he's a few shy. I think he's like 3 or 4 shy because I
Mm,
think
we're gonna have
it
to
was
get.
dubbed. There was less than 20 people that got scored, so I think
That's
he only got 7
actually
points.
that's a good transition to
Yeah,
what I wanted to talk about next, which is Swamp Classic. So Swamp Classic, a little bigger race. I guess a lot of people now are familiar with it because Vegan Cyclist did a video on it a few years ago. This is sort of Florida's season opener, and these normally don't fall on the same weekend, but this time they did. And I think we're going to see more of this. This is like the wider point I wanted to make about these races is this one was kind of a coincidence, but I think we're going to see there are just a ton of races this year, and I think we're going to see more times where the field is split like this. Like you just said, the field was smaller in the 3-4s. The field was less than half of what it was at Sumatonga in the 1-2s this year, and I think a lot of that is because some of the Florida guys that normally come up for it, like the Gutenplan support clean sport guys, often come up for Sumatonga, but they were all at Swamp Classic down in Florida. So I think we're going to keep seeing that as we move into, ACA, NCL, all the other series we've talked about, plus all the stage races that are going on.
yeah.
There's just a lot of racing this season.
I'm afraid we're hitting a little bit of saturation. Like I was looking at like as a team, we have like a Google Calendar of like all the races in our region, and there's literally a race weekend like the within driving distance from Birmingham, Alabama, every single weekend from last weekend until the end, like until the end of October, basically.
Yeah, and
It's
that's saying a
ridiculous.
lot because like Birmingham, I mean, we have a severely underrated cycling scene, I would say, but
Agree.
like we're not a cycling mecca, we're not Boulder or something, and we have probably more racing than we can sustain. Um, I pulled up the picture if you're watching us on video here of the podium, but this also ties back to something we talked about on the last episode. We were calling out some underrated riders, and the rider on the top step here of Swamp Classic, who I believe won the road race and the time trial, that is Brock Mason, who is on Ride Bikes this year. We called him out as like an underrated guy to watch, and he has beaten former national champion Johnny Brown there on the second step in both the road race and the time trial. Johnny Brown on Miami Blazers now.
Yeah.
Ben brought that to my attention, but that's a big win both for him and for us because that's us.
Yeah.
We called that shot and we
We
swooshed
called
it.
it, and I think anybody from the Southeast, like we're both from the Southeast to an extent, me less so than you, but like anybody from the Southeast who like wins at a big level or like is competitive at a big level, I consider it a win because the
Yeah,
Southeast is like super underrated with like the level and quality of cycling that we have. So to
yeah,
see Brock like at a high level, beating a national level rider like Miami Blazers is basically Legion 2.0. So
yeah.
to see that's like super awesome.
Yeah, I think Johnny Brown's win. I was watching when he won the national championship that year. That was an amazing win because you have all like the EF guys, a lot of the World Tour guys come back for that race, and Johnny was on Action at the time. He was super
Yeah.
young. I clearly remember that he was racing a disc, not a disc brake, a rim brake Allay at the time, and this was like after anyone else was on rim brakes. So I started pulling for him just because he was on rim brakes, and he had a pretty strong, amazing ride to kind of go solo in the last like 5K or something and held it. So
Yeah.
incredibly strong guy with a huge pedigree, and then to see Brock competing at that level, it's also like sort of validating for all of us that have had to race against Brock that like I'm like we're not that bad, or maybe we are, but at least like we're getting beaten consistently by someone of a high caliber.
Yeah, it's like the same guy group of guys that for the past 5 years we've all been beating our head against a wall, like trying to beat, and then it's like, well, they're in our race, like we see them every weekend,
Yeah,
and then like, and then they go and like pull off a crazy result, and you're like, it makes you feel better. It's like,
Yeah, it's
okay,
like
it's not
okay,
me, it's them. Like they're just that
right.
much better.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah. So it's good to see him getting on like a national team with Ride Bikes, bro. Ride Bikes, another race happening. So there's racing going on in the southeast, but there's also racing going on out on the west coast with CBR number 2. We talked about the first CBR, so I want to mention it briefly for a couple reasons. But Ride Bikes once again. If you're watching the video, I'm showing this is kind of as the breakaways getting formed. There was a break of 7 or 8 riders at this one that went clear right around the hour mark and stayed away. This is like right as they're getting established. But Ride Bikes had a rider in this break. Notably, Corey got in this break. Corey Williams missed out last week. Wasn't going to let that happen again. And then also another notable, we talked about the Wildlife Generation team going away and where those guys were going to go, whether or not they would be able to find rides. And Cormac McGeough, who was on Wildlife Generation. Another probably should have been on our list of like underrated American guys. I think actually been
yeah, I
racing at a
agree.
high level for many years, but done a lot of racing in other countries. He made this breakaway and was just off the podium, but he got a ride recently with to tie it to another thing we were talking about with kind of a UCI like South American UCI team. Let's see. They are called Canels Zero Uno, and his entire post about it here is in another language. So I assume he's going to be racing in South America a good bit. But good to see him not only getting a ride for this year, but also off to a pretty quick start with the CBR race last weekend, making the break, sticking that to the finish. But yeah, you can see on his Instagram here, he's raced in Rwanda, Turkey, Malaysia. So not a name you might know if you're like a big American racing head,
Yeah,
but
definitely doing like big stuff. It'll be it'll be interesting because I think even like Matt Govero from like our Birmingham, Mississippi area raced on like a similar team, maybe like in El Salvador.
yeah, I think he
That,
he did like a stagiaire, like a guest rider
yeah,
position for a race.
yeah,
Cormac McGeough. My pronunciation is being McGeough is being my pronunciation is being corrected by the chat here. I should know Cormac actually raced with my Zwift team during the lockdowns in 2020, 2021. So I've done some Zwifting with Cormac. Good dude. That kind of put him on my radar, and I've been following him ever since. But he had some cool content from like Tour of Turkey and stuff over on his YouTube. Definitely stronger than most people are giving him credit for.
yeah, yeah, for
Um,
sure.
moving from races that already happened, that's kind of it for the racing that has happened into racing that's going to happen. Uh, Athens Twilight, one of my favorite races, is back this year, and it has been added to American Crit Cup.
Yeah, huge. Like I think last year we were all like, why is Twilight not part of a national series? Like it's like the crit. Like it's not like, oh, it's a big crit. It's like the crit.
Athens is like the Super Bowl of crits for sure. I've
Yeah,
definitely heard that before.
yeah. And so it's great to see it like being tied in to the ACC. Especially I think it's cool that it's a series kickoff. Like series opener, I think it'll get more attention for it being the opener, bring more eyes into like the whole ACC as a whole.
Good news, bad news on that from my perspective. Bad news that the first round is not in Alabama anymore, although I think we'll still probably both be at Athens, but you know, it's
Yeah,
not our
hundred
hometown
percent.
race that'll be first. And also, word is that they're changing the course from last year's course, which I loved, which had the big hill in it, the course that in the Pro 1 race, we saw insane racing. Two different groups lapped up, over half the field dropped, Justin Williams dropped.
Yep.
Just like insanity. We're going from that course back to the 2018 course, which was a little bit more standard four corner, although corner 3 is a little bit of a death trap if they're running it the
Corner
direction I think they are.
corner three is hellish. Like the first separation. is always that corner three, and it's because people hit the deck. Like it's not because
Yeah.
anybody's doing anything or there's actual racing. It's that corner's just unbelievably hard. Um, so
I've
yeah, I,
told this story before, but not on this podcast. But the first Athens Twilight I did, this was probably 16 or 17, something like that. Um, I did the qualifying race. You have to, if you're going to do the amateur race, you have to qualify, and then they put amateurs all together for like a big race. They qualify a bunch of Cat 2s, a few less Cat 3s, but they fill out a field and do
yep,
basically two races on the main course. But I'm lined up for the big race on the course on the main course here. There's a junior team lined up in front of me, and this guy like jumps over the barriers and hands all of them Red Bulls, and they crack the Red Bulls and just down them. And I'm like, what is go? There's these kids are like 13, and they're all drinking a full 8 ounce Red Bull like moments before the start, and I'm like, who is this dude? This because he's got a crazy manic energy. And it was the guy who went on to run Butcher Box for 2 years. Who, if you watch the American Criterium documentary, you'll see him. But he's got a lot of energy. That dude. I remember seeing that documentary later and being like, oh, that's the guy who's giving all those kids Red Bull. But so all those kids are like geeked out on Red Bull and pushing the pace super hard in the beginning, and probably like 3 laps in, 4 laps in, somebody crashed in corner three, and I came around the corner and there was a bike in the air. I went under a bike that was fully in the air. I was the first person to make it clean through that crash, but that was the separation.
yep. And I think our teammate Bruce, who lives in Montana, like may have been that year, the year after, like got a concussion and like snapped his frame, like in that corner.
Yeah,
Like it's just like if you're somebody who's like if people don't care about bike racing and they're like, oh, I just want to see a crash, which I hate. Like corner three is like where they're all gonna be, and
that
that's
course, there's
where it always
people
happens.
around the whole thing.
Oh
Like
yeah,
that's what's awesome about that race. It's super deep with spectators all the way around every year. I think maybe even more so on this iteration of the course that goes right by Georgia Theater, and I
they
don't know.
always they always get it's a perfect combination of like it's a college town, the campus is walking distance from the course. They always time it to where it's like the weekend after finals. So all of the college kids are just like ready to party and they're already going to the bars anyways. And then they're there and there's chaotic bike racing. So you have like chaotic bike racers mixing with college kids and like everybody's drunk and happy and it's like it's just a
Yeah,
crazy atmosphere that I've
it's the
never seen
Tulsa.
matched before.
It's like the Crybaby Hill Tulsa formula. It's like
Yeah.
the race is close enough to a college in kind of a smaller town where there's not a ton of other stuff going on, and it goes right by the bar, and it's been going long enough that people just kind of know like this is what you do that weekend.
Yep.
I think that's a big gain for the ACC though. I think that's, if they had to lose a race and gain a race, I think that there's not really a better race you could gain than Twilight.
Yeah, for sure.
And Twilight's also, so that means that ACC has a Speed Week race. I believe they have a Tour of America's Dairyland race, an Intelligentsia race. They're just stacking up all of the big legacy crit series that people are gonna make it to. So I I tend to think that they may win the war at least this year in terms of all of these competing series, even among the sort of like legacy stage races that still exist, which there are not a ton of
Yeah.
those, but I think that of all the things kind of pulling focus this road season, I think ACC is going to be the thing. Especially they've proven they can produce a high quality stream that people know how to get to, and yeah, I think ACC is going to be tough to beat. They've set the bar high this season.
Yeah, and I think just them adding that speed week race like may move the needle for a team that was on the bubble of doing something else.
Yep.
And I think a lot of teams are now, if they were on the bubble, they're moving to ACC. And maybe even some teams that were all in on doing something else, maybe looking and going, well, all the eyeballs are going to be at Athens that weekend. you know.
Right. It's going to be hard for NCL to get eyeballs since we're what, a month, 2 months out from their first race.
I think like 7 weeks,
Yeah,
something like
we're
that.
within
Yeah.
2 months of their first race, and there's still not really much. We each caught a couple articles that have gone out in weird places. There's a new one in Axios Atlanta about their Atlanta race. Yeah, 4-8 Miami Beach. So we're almost exactly 2 months from their first race, and there's still not really much promotion. You found another article somewhere, right?
Yeah, I did a quick NCL Google search and scrolled down a little bit and saw an article. It was basically just giving that like a little bit of update on the team, like the team camps they're doing at towards the end of March. So they're going to be out in Arizona, both the Denver Disruptors and Miami Knights, out in Arizona for like 10 days doing a team camp. There's wording invited press
Hmm.
invited to the team camps to go kind of follow them around and do everything. And then it's basically until like March 31st, or like it kind of ends like it ends 3 days before the Tucson stage race, Tucson Bicycle Classic.
Yeah,
And then that's the week before the first NCL race in Miami.
nice. So
So I imagine towards March, like they're waiting to drop a big bomb of info, like beginning of March, towards the back half of March, which is far too late for anybody like us to plan to do anything with it.
right, I think they may have missed the boat a little bit. I will say, we clowned on their social media. I'm looking through their Instagram now. These individual race posters look better than the other stuff they've been
Yep.
producing, but they do also follow the trajectory of like not really having any. It's just a date, April 8th in Miami Beach, and there's
Yeah.
not any like clarity on, where in Miami you would go to see this race or at what time people will be racing.
Yeah.
We got some more marketing speak here. It's yeah, there's just a complete lack of clarity on what's going on with
Yeah.
NCL, so
And
it'll be interesting.
I did see the website got a little bit of a facelift. They kind of reworked that a little bit. It looks a lot better now. I think that's probably a good sign that they're working and moving stuff, and that we might get like a big press release soon.
Yep, we'll
Um,
have our eyes peeled for. We'll definitely be watching for those first couple of races. Those teams do have talent. I mean, we mentioned it, but they've pulled people from World Tour teams. They've pulled good talent. It'll be
yeah,
interesting to see if they can actually, spend one week in Arizona and kind of like gel as teams cohesively and start racing together. But it'll make this season interesting, I think, if nothing else.
yeah, I agree. I think it'll be weird in a crit. I think Sergio Henao is kind of like, if I was him, I would assume leadership, and if I was
Yeah,
Clever Martinez, I would assume crit leadership. Um,
right.
and
Yeah, there could
so
be some power struggles here because
yeah,
there's going to be cases like that where riders like haven't ridden with each other before and kind of like don't know each other's pedigree. So yeah, I don't know how they're going to be able to. Swain Tuft is one of the coaches. I mean, maybe he's got enough clout that he'll be able to wrangle them. But yeah, it's a big ask.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Another like interesting early season thing that we're going to be looking at is Valley of the Sun stage race coming up February 17th through 19th. So that's not this coming weekend, but one more weekend. Kind of the traditional season opener as far as stage races go. Just a little 3 day, road race, time trial crit situation. But I looked at the start list for it the other day and not a ton of signups. I think that may be the bellwether for like what the health of stage racing is this year. But Project
Yeah,
Echelon is signed up. Texas Roadhouse had some people signed up. I think it's going to be hard to beat Project Echelon in that arena this year. It'll be interesting to see if Legion tries it.
yeah. I mean, Project Echelon is sort of like America's team when it comes to stage races in America. Like they just kind of win. And so Legion, I think, has a strong enough team to compete if that's what they're going for.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
they've
just
always
don't
talked
see.
about it. Like Legion from the get go, they had that plan of like, we're gonna have a stage race team that's headed up by Corey, and then like a crit racing team that's headed by Justin. And they had kind of like the UCI team. The idea was that the UCI team would be one thing, and the like elite crit team would be another thing. But I think the focus has gotten pulled in the last few years, and I wonder if that's because of the sort of like decline of stage racing, or if it's. I mean, it's hard to just like have two teams. That's a lot of infrastructure and
Mhm.
just a lot of stuff, a lot of
Yes, a lot
coordination.
of
I want.
infrastructure, budget, coordination. Like we see it where we're like picking an A and a B squad on our team of 14 people, where it's like who's going to race the 2-3, who might race the 3-4. I can't imagine like deciding that on a UCI level, like, oh, you're gonna go do like, Tour of California, if
Yeah,
rest in peace, and but you're gonna go do like Snake Alley, like,
and
like
right, and we're
that's
still going to the same race. Like we're splitting the squad up, you know, among like we're all going to Sumatanga or whatever. But
yep,
they're talking about sending one squad to one side of the country and one squad to the other side of the country. So
yeah,
that's also, we're still sharing a tent. We're all still sharing, infrastructure. They're taking a different Sewanee each way, and like team
yep,
vehicles and stuff. I think that's part of the decline of stage racing, though. Like it's just so much. A stage race is so much more spread out, and it's just a big production to provide support for. Whereas a crit, you can pop a tent by the side, and your team's like kind of got somewhere to hang out. Stage race, you're talking about follow cars, you're talking about time trial bikes potentially, like also
yep,
bringing a time trial. I mean, Valley of the Sun, the picture we're looking at is a guy on a TT bike, so I don't think they're going the Merckx TT style for the TT, which
yep.
a lot of debate on that. I actually think it's cool if people are doing actual time trials on time trial bikes. I don't
Here,
want that to just go away entirely, but I think
here,
most races need to do like a bonus for Merc style or something for
what I what I
amateurs.
what I kind of think about it is, and I'm going to take a sidestep here to collegiate cyclocross. So in collegiate cross, I'm sorry, not in collegiate cross, in collegiate road racing, I had a similar thought on collegiate cross at ties. So in collegiate road racing, you cannot use a time trial bike in team time trials or ITTs. And the idea is that a a more affluent rider or rider who has a pro team, because if you're a collegiate cyclist, you can still be on a pro team and race collegiate. So someone in that situation can't just have a TT bike and essentially buy the race or
Yeah,
have the race solely off of equipment.
you
I
can buy a
think at
lot
a
of speed on a
pro,
TT bike.
right. I think at a pro level, absolutely time trial bikes like tough. If you don't have one, tough. That's what's needed to compete. I think at anything below a professional level, maybe TT bikes, don't need to be there. I'd rather see someone have like a super dorked out aero road bike, like just with crazy bar setup, hood setup, deep wheels, whatever, versus like some like dentist with a 15K,
BMC time
Pinarello,
machine.
just like kicking
Yeah,
ass, like
I mean
versus
that
like
was
people like
maybe the
beating
most
kids
fun
on
part
different
of
road bikes.
Tour Down Under was seeing all the weird road bike setups.
Oh yeah, Bilbao setup like that got headlines for a week because it was so weird.
Yeah,
Um,
I guess there have been a lot of calls for like time trial bikes to go away entirely. And I feel like that's a little bit extreme at the professional level. I would like to see them on time trial bikes. And I also think like,
yeah,
I wish in America we had more of a, and this is from someone who kind of hates doing time trials, but I wish we had more of a culture of like local clubs putting on time trials, kind of like they do in Great Britain, where that's
yeah,
sort of like its own little scene. We don't have too many just like standalone time trial races. I wish we did.
yeah. I mean, we have the one in Alabama. Shout out to Bill
We have
Sykes
a
for always
couple.
putting that on. Yeah, and
Yeah,
we
we
had
had the Oak
one back
Mountain
in
one last year.
August. Yeah,
Hmm.
like there's always a couple, but it's like in Brit, like same thing with the hill climb culture. Like it'd be cool to have like a proper like 5 minute hill climb TT style race.
Yeah. The sense I
Um,
get, and someone correct me if this is wrong, but is that a lot of places in Great Britain, there's almost like a weekly time trial throughout the summer where it's not maybe not even like fully closed roads. They're just finding a place that's
yeah,
got a good straight out and back situation. They've got a course marshal at either end, and you just kind of go. You show up every week, and there's a series or something. But something like that would be cool.
I
We got
think
a question in the
think that's
chat.
accurate. Oh, good.
Thoughts on Jordan Shane racing for Hugh Dog Racing? He beat Zach Gregg at an early TT. Zach Gregg, I believe, on Project Echelon, good TT rider. Both of
Yep.
them prominent Zwifters. Yeah, Jordan Shane. I wonder if he signed up for Valley of the Sun because I did see several Hugh Dog riders signed up. So a good team. I don't know if they'll be able to step to Project Echelon, but Project Echelon has lost Monk. They lost Brandon Feary. He
Mhm.
mostly raced crits for them last year, but yeah, we'll see where they're at. I think they're still going to be very strong on the stage race side this season, though.
Yeah, they just have the team infrastructure and size and sort of everything you need. Now like the Valley of the Sun TT is generally pretty decisive for the GC. Like
Yeah, it's
if you
such
have
a
a really
short
good
stage
TT,
race. It's
yeah,
3 days, so
yeah,
that's almost always decided by the TT, unless there's a road race with an insane climb.
yeah. So it gets very possible that with a strong TT, Project Echelon could like have the up like get upset there. But like they just got the numbers. I think like they could control the race, send someone in a break, and control it. So it's hard to predict.
Yeah, Shane's definitely a strong rider, though.
Yeah,
What I'll have to look and see what his early season result was. I guess that was a. Are they racing in Canada already? That would be insane to me. I think most Canadians. I know a lot of Canadians from my Zwift team, and most of those guys are still just riding inside because they have to. Still snow on the ground and everything. They
there's
don't
no
even have
way.
the option.
Maybe like fat bike racing. Wasn't there like a fat bike world championships or something recently, like in
Are they still
Vancouver
doing that?
area?
Yeah, I remember
There's,
when they did.
yeah,
They did Fat Bike Nationals. That was
yeah,
a big like point
yeah.
of
That's what it was.
contention with a lot
Yeah,
of people.
Jeremiah Bishop won. Just gonna throw that out there.
That
So
that
it's
tracks.
possible. Yeah. So I mean, it's possible there's racing in Canada, but I hope to God they're not road racing on those icy roads. Like
Yeah, it was almost
that's
too.
irresponsible.
Yeah, it was almost too cold to road race in Alabama last weekend.
Yeah.
So I hope they're not road racing in. Okay, Shane lives in Tucson. He's on a Canadian team, but yeah, so we're getting confirmation that it's they're still snowed in Canada, but that Shane's in Tucson. Yeah, all the
Yeah.
pros. I mean,
Nice.
that's what the NCL teams are doing. Everyone goes to Arizona, or they used to all go to Athens. I guess it's like not cool to winter in Athens anymore, but we used to have a lot of pros wintering in Athens. Even some of the Athens
Yeah.
guys are going down to Florida now.
Yeah. I mean Tucson, like it's I guess it's a little more attractive than Athens terrain wise, maybe, but
Yeah, you got Mount
I
Lemon.
mean, yeah, and I think some of the pro depth that was in Athens maybe has relocated. So like when
Yeah,
certain people don't live somewhere, they don't people don't travel to ride with those folks. Maybe
yeah.
that's part of it.
Athens still has a great like cycling culture, but they don't have like a
Yeah,
Jittery Joe's or like a national level team like that based there. That's kind of like
yeah,
setting the baseline for what those group rides are going to be like on a weekly basis. Don't
yeah.
get me wrong.
Probably
I'm sure what's their winter? They have that really hard winter ride.
WBL Winter Bike League.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm
Yeah,
sure I would still get spit out the back on a WBL, but
it's they probably have the most like they're probably the collectively strongest out of like the southeast cycling scenes outside of like the Brevard area. But it's not like when you think about how it was 5 years ago, where it was like you could go on a ride and be like Ian Garrison and Michael Garrison and Ty. Like it just sort of like changes the scope of like
yeah,
how that is.
yeah, for sure. Um, that brings me to something we wanted to talk about because it kind of got lost in the off season. We mentioned last week we were talking about CBR. Oh, I guess I'll go ahead and say this right here too. There's no new news on the Legion base series. The
Yep.
mysterious CRT is what we've seen it named. We called out the potential schedule for that on the last episode. So go listen to that if you want to hear about it, but no news on that front. I've scoured the internet, nothing beyond the rumors and speculation we've heard. Um, but on the rumors and speculation and Legion, we were talking about how for CBR they've been racing in solid black kits the last couple of weeks, and they've got little logos on the kits, but it was tough to tell who all their sponsors were, and we were not sure if Zwift was back on, but it has been confirmed that they lost Zwift as a sponsor in the fallout from the fight, the Crit Beef fight.
If you don't know that fight, you weren't paying attention. Like you just
Yeah,
were
where
under
were
a
you
rock.
last year?
Right. It's one of those things where your actions always have a consequence. And I think Zwift is probably finding more value out of like their Lantern Rouge sponsorship, and a couple other avenues where they're working.
I wonder
Um,
if they're gonna keep putting money into stuff like that, or I mean, we're seeing kind of a period of contraction
yep.
through the fitness industry in general. Things kind of ballooned out during COVID,
Yep.
and I don't wonder if maybe they were looking for a way to shrink their marketing budget, and then the fight just gave them like, oh, well, that's an easy choice, you know.
Yeah.
Whereas
I
it might
mean,
have been a question.
yeah, right. I mean, I think I mean, knowing the scope of Legion, they are probably putting at least a quarter mil of budget into them, if not more. And like, if you have a good reason to drop, to save a quarter of $1 million or $500,000, like it makes it pretty, pretty easy to make that choice.
Yeah. And if you don't know what we're talking about, last year after Salt Lake, there was a racing incident on the last lap. Michael Hernandez from Best Buddies at the time tried to come inside the Legion train. I'll give my. I guess let's go to this. I've got the actual thing pulled up. I don't want to like litigate the actual incident too much, but I'll talk about what I think happened here. There are
Yep.
two or three angles of it going on. And I guess this isn't too much of a hot take because my take is like, I think the blame is kind of 60-40 here for what happened. It's just a question of to whom do you attribute 60% and to whom do you attribute 40%. But this corner in the last lap, Hernandez tries to shoot up the inside, which is fully doable. Inside is left open for him. He and Corey, it's a very low quality video, but I'm just gonna describe what's happening for the audio listeners as well. He and Corey Williams get tangled up. Corey is the second to last guy in the Legion train, and Corey basically comes all the way right to left across the road and pins Hernandez against the left hand curb here. And it's kind of a miracle that no one crashed. The left right motion on this is like, I mean, they literally go from the absolute right side of the road to the absolute left side of the road in a couple of seconds, with even like a little bit of a flick into the curb at the end of it there. So that's one angle of it. I think from a second angle, you can see a little bit better what happens as Hernandez is coming up here. I think this is me reading into it, but I'm looking at the freeze frame here. We're gonna go Zapruder film, I guess.
Yep.
Hernandez is here in the Stars and Stripes. Corey is outside him. They've already sort of set their lines through the corner, and I think Corey senses that someone is coming up on his shoulder and starts to change his line a little bit to kind of shut the door on Hernandez, but they're going so fast and they're already basically through the corner when he decides to do that. So Corey's leaned a little bit harder than everyone else in the Legion train, and I think that's because he's trying to swing the back end of that train inside. So that's where I'm gonna go. this is probably 60% Corey if I had to guess, but right here Corey gets hooked by Hernandez and I think their elbows touch. They both have their elbows out trying to protect their front end, and it looks like they just kind of scrape elbows, and that sends Corey's bars a little bit sideways. And it's honestly extremely impressive that he was able to save this. If you're watching
Right.
the video, I don't know if that's a tubeless burp or what, but it looks like his front
That's
wheel leaves the ground for a second.
yeah, it's like impressive. Like that's insane bike handling.
Yeah,
Like anybody else crashes.
if you lose front wheel traction and you keep it upright, like that's pretty impressive skill. And then for Hernandez to be on the other side of that, so I can see from Hernandez's perspective, I think what
Yep.
he saw happen basically was Justin or Corey, sorry, not only tried to shut the door on him, but shut the door on him and then continued to take him all the way across the road into the curb, flick him against the curb. And that could have just been because of that's where I don't know. I don't know if Corey was like still trying to cut him off or I don't know there. But I'm
That,
sure to Hernandez, it felt like that could not have been more blatant of you just swinging across me and taking me
yeah.
into the curb. And it also
Yeah.
would not have been the first time.
That's the thing. So Corey posted that clip as like
Yeah,
a
the
hey,
clip we were just watching was from Legion's or Corey's one of their Instagrams. Like they
yeah.
posted that.
So that was posted and it was sort of like a hey, this is an accident, like this is uncalled for. And maybe it was, right? The thing I want to give them the benefit of the doubt here. Maybe that was just a racing situation, which
I
happens
agree. I
all
think
the
that's
time.
at least a gray area on that one.
Yeah. And then but it goes back to the history of the way you race, right? So it's not necessarily right.
Yeah.
Rarely do you see something come to that sort of like that sort of
The
head, and it's a single instant.
Yeah, the
So
point is that how it got there was not that this was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, but
yeah,
having talked to some guys that raced in these fields consistently last year, there was kind of an overarching theme that if you were riding next to the Legion train, they would take you all the way to the gutter.
yep,
And that was kind of a known tactic. So this might have been accidental an accidental version of a thing that was happening more consistently throughout the
yep,
season, but on this channel at other times last year we looked at footage, some of that drone footage from overhead where you could really see Legion. If another train starts to ride next to them, they would ride that train all the way into the right gutter and then they would go all the way to the left gutter. And I don't know, you can say, people say like, well, if you've got the front you can take whatever line you want, but at the same time, and maybe this is a video for me to make in the future, but you compare that top-down footage to top-down footage of a World Tour sprint, and a lot of times in the World Tour, I mean, you have twisty, turny finishes, and you have sometimes 5 sprint trains all riding side by side, and there is like a mutual level of like, mutually assured destruction. Like we're not going to steer into your train, and you don't steer into our train. If you want to come over the top, you got to do it by pedaling, but no one is
yep.
riding each other into the gutter.
Well, that's because the UCI will fine you for doing that. Whereas, like
Right.
in a USAC race, like in a corner and a crit, it's kind of like like what can you do, right? So I
We don't
think
have helicopters too. That's like
yeah,
UCI, they have commissaires there on the line. Like there are USAC officials and stuff, but they're standing on the course. They're not, even if there is a drone shot, which is like new and recent, the commissaires aren't looking at that, not in real time. And it would have to be something egregious that causes a crash for them to even sort of like retroactively
yeah,
go back and think about it.
yeah, and unfortunately with crits, there's so much of a crashes happen attitude or a cornering is cornering and like sometimes you adjust attitude to stuff that it unfortunately there's always going to be that like gray area you can lean into. Like if you put someone in the gutter in a corner, you can be like, well, I was just taking my line and they were in the inside. That's not my fault. Even if like you were intentionally like getting in there a little bit, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
And so it's just one of those things where it's the style of racing that lends itself to an
Ag-
aggressive
yeah. Aggressive moves.
situation, um, and enough of a unregulation or like uncheckability to
Yeah.
it that you can sort of plausible deniability your way out of a
And
situation.
people will say on a lot of this stuff, like, oh, it used to be worse. Like, it was worse back in blah, blah, blah day. It was worse back in the 90s, or it was worse back in whenever. But I think there's a couple of aspects to that. One is like, who cares? That doesn't make it a good idea now. But the other is that now that we have all this helmet cam footage and like people are, you can see these crashes happening. It's like if we have the tools to sort of like litigate them or like think about the cause and maybe stop them from happening, even if that was the case in the past, which I don't believe that it was really worse. I feel like I've been paying attention in some form or fashion to this stuff since kind of the end of the UHC Blue Train era. And I will say I see much more crashing now than I did then.
I
And
was gonna
there's
say
a
like
lot of
I've been
contributing factors.
yeah. To give a little bit of background, my parents raced on their collegiate cycling team in 19 from 1991 to 95. So like bike racing has been in my life since I was born in 97, right? So like we've always watched whether it was the tour or gone to watch crits or whatever it was, and I've never seen the level like the amount of crashing or just aggressive riding up until 2021, 2022, and 2022 it really came to a head there. It was a lot of bravado, braggadociousness, not necessarily not placing blame on Legion, like 100%. Like it, they sort of like initiated this bravado to it, and then everybody else felt they had to live up to that.
Yeah, it seems
And sort
like
of
the
created
that
attention.
lack of enforcement was just continually being pushed like on both sides, even to the point where if you want to talk about the fight itself, I mean, it was Michael Hernandez who initiated the fight. I mean, he
Yeah,
went looking. So I was streaming this race live, and I cut it off before the fight. I probably would have a million views if I hadn't done that, but I didn't know they were going to fight, so I didn't want to just
yeah,
sit around and watch them mill around before the podiums. But
yeah,
I did note, I was like, Michael Hernandez, like he is bugging out right now. Like his eyes are. It kept cutting to shots of him where he was
yeah,
like his eyes were bugging out of his head, and he went looking for Corey, and it looked like Corey was trying to calm him down, but in his mind, it's like that's easy for Corey to say after his team went 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever, and especially after a whole season of that happening. But I guess what we
yeah.
wanted to get to is sort of the cost to the sport of all this stuff. So I mean, very concretely, the cost to them is the loss of the Zwift sponsorship, which I mean, a lot of people are coming into the sport via Zwift, and if we want to create a pipeline to real racing, the a Zwift partnership with a real life team was a good way to do that, and it was,
Yep.
I'm sure, a huge high dollar sponsor for Legion.
I mean, it took up half of the front of their kit,
Yeah,
which
they
is pretty valuable. So,
yeah, Legion. Part of their, I mean, they're one of the only teams whose name is not the name of their title sponsors, which makes me think that to get that much real estate on their kit was probably very expensive. And then Best Buddies' entire kit is gone. Best Buddies, that was the title sponsor, and they left the sport entirely. And Hernandez is rebuilding. Some of those guys went to NCL. They've kind of, a lot of those guys are going to land on their feet in one way or another, but that was the big rivalry and the big storyline we were seeing building was Legion versus Best Buddies. And there was a good story to follow there. Best Buddies, there was at least one race last year where they did get their train inside Legion and get a win. And that sort of drove a little bit of a narrative. But now we're going to have to like start that narrative over.
yep. That's the thing is like what teams are gonna do what, and like best buddies, like it sucks. You have like finally back in American cycling, a large corporate-ish sponsor, being the title sponsor of a team, and it Best Buddies just so happens to be an organization that works with kids with disabilities, and so like you have your name all over this kit,
Right.
and then your sort of headline star rider, because we forget Michael Hernandez like was a major contender in Tour of Utah back in a few years ago. Like he was a
Yeah.
very legit rider who went back to crits.
I mean,
So
he's in the Stars and Stripes in that video, you know, like
yeah,
that's a pretty
right. Like
a
the
pretty
optics,
tough image.
yeah, like the optics for your brand having your name on that sort of behavior. And I'm not necessarily against fighting necessarily, but when you're representing a company, there's a certain level of decorum that you
That's
have to have.
another Yeah, that's another angle of the like. Another thing people used to say, in addition to like, oh, the dive bombing was worse and all that stuff, is like, yeah, there used to be fights in the parking lot all the time, and it's like, I don't believe there were as many. I think that what
No.
happened is there were probably the same amount, but you would hear about it. It like the legend of the fight would grow because there it was
Yeah.
all just people telling their buddies about so and so got in a fight, and also there was no like this same fight could have happened and we would have heard that story, but there would not have been the video. You would not see
Yeah.
the Stars and Stripes. Everybody didn't have a cell phone camera, so even if that was true and even if it was like fine back in the day that people were fighting in the parking lot after the crit, from a longevity of the sport perspective, it's just not going to be tenable anymore.
And to put this into another realm, like both you and I are both very into hardcore music and sort of that whole realm of things. And I'm sorry if you're not. Most of you are not, probably. The band Earth Crisis, like the legend they have with like sort of the eco-terrorism stuff, and people would burn McDonald's because of an eco strike lyric, and not eco strike, Earth Crisis lyric, and all this stuff. And I've been into hardcore music since like 2005, and I've never seen anything like that ever happen. So a lot of
Right.
it's just because there's no like tangible evidence of stuff actually happening.
Yeah, the
A lot of
legend
it's
can
just this
grow.
legend that
Yeah,
grows to this huge mass.
the oral tradition. But if that was happening now and it was like, there was someone's posting a TikTok of like a guy in an Earth Crisis shirt, like, cutting the fence at the slaughterhouse or whatever, like
Yep.
that, there would be negative consequences of that probably. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe they would get huge. Maybe that would be like a huge news story, and they would become the biggest band in the world. But
Maybe.
there would probably that would probably happen. But simultaneously, there would be another one of those like punk rock panic kind of crackdowns where like all the venues would start getting shut down and police would show up at shows, like
Yeah.
which is kind of the parallel equivalent to, I think, the negative consequences we're seeing in racing from some of that
Yeah.
stuff. And
Yeah.
beyond the fight itself, I also think that like we see a ton more crashes in amateur races now. There's always crashes in amateur races, but I think uh, some of it is like people just think crashes are normal, and it's both bad because people are seeing that kind of riding and thinking it's the norm, which causes crashes. And then you also have people who, I've done a lot of Zwift related stuff on this channel. It kind of started when I was trying to figure out what Zwift was when my entire crit season was canceled in 2020. I just wanted to do something with my fitness. So there's a lot of Zwift stuff here, but I know a lot of Zwift people who won't race outside because either their perception is that they're going to get hurt or the reality. I mean, Jammers Daniel Jamrazik, he was on the rap podcast on Nathan Guerra's channel a couple weeks ago, and he talked about having a couple of serious injuries out racing crits in St. Louis, and he was just like, "Yeah, I'm packing it up." He only races Zwift now, which is
Yep.
not great for the sport.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, how many people do we know just in Birmingham who are fit, fast, come to Tuesday Night Worlds, rip it apart with us, and
And just don't
they
race.
won't race a crit.
Yeah.
They just say, "I'm not doing it."
And I mean, I
Um,
understand. I broke my hand last year.
yeah, right.
It's
Like, it's a tough environment to be in. Like, and I don't want to sort of American crit this like butcher box thing where like rough and tough, it's a war zone out there, but it's a tough environment. You're shoulder to shoulder with guys cornering at 30 miles an hour. It's a tough environment to be in, but there's a certain level of group riding, not group ride, group riding etiquette
Yeah,
that's been lost lately.
it's mutually assured destruction, like
Yep.
mutual like respect of each other and just understanding. This is just the truth of any bike group riding or racing in general, is that anyone could crash the whole group out at any time if they wanted to. And the only
Yep.
reason that doesn't happen is that we're all choosing to make good decisions at all
Yep.
times. And it's totally possible. I mean, occasionally someone is going to corner too hot and their tire is going to break free, but a lot of these behaviors that are causing a ton of crashing can be curbed by just people protecting their front wheel better, not riding into gaps that don't exist, and doing the racing with their legs rather than with their elbows. And there's a skill to that, to learning like where that line is. But I think it being cool to push beyond that line is probably a net negative for the sport in general, especially
Yeah,
crit
I
racing.
mean, yeah, and I think the popularity of that Crit Beef Instagram channel where it's just crash porn,
Crit
like
drama.
crit drama. There it is, crit
I
drama.
I was on it
It,
last year. Go back,
yeah,
go find my Sunny King crash.
it's just crash porn, and it's like it doesn't help anybody get into the sport because I can go on that Instagram page and see probably at this point 500 posts of example of why I shouldn't race. Here's
Yeah,
why I shouldn't race, and it's not helping anybody, and it kind of sucks. Like,
yeah.
because frankly, it sucks.
I mean, as someone who has a unrelated to cycling but a broken leg right now, I definitely don't love seeing it. I don't love just
Yep.
seeing crash porn all the time. It kind of makes me cringe a little bit.
Yep.
Um, so I think the crux of this whole thing, I want to talk about what we can do to make it better, which I think in Birmingham we are doing. We're starting a local crit series this year. And I've talked about how like the series in Nashville that they do, the driveway in Austin, you tend to see less crashes at these races, partially because people know the course week in, week out, but also partially because you're racing with the same people. So there's a level of mutual respect. And then partially because in a place where there is an ingrained culture of crit racing, people learn those skills, and they learn the skills from people they respect. They're having people that they know, like, pull them aside after the race and be like, "Hey, when you made this move or that move, that could have caused this crash." And they're like taking that in rather than having someone yell, "Hold your line" at you during the race. That's not going to like stick in the same way.
No, like, yeah, you hear hold your line being yelled, and you're like, oh, who's this asshole? Right.
Right.
Versus, like, I can go up to some 16-year-old kid at the Birmingham crit and be like, hey, man, that was a really sketchy move. Here's how you can avoid that in the future, da 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 da, and not be so aggressive in that moment.
And that's going to
That's what,
sink in.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what helps somebody grow. Like when my dad was taking me on group rides, he'd be like, hey, don't do this, don't do that. Don't have, he'd like show me like, hey, this is what happens when you half wheel somebody, right? And it
Right.
sucks, right? And
Yeah.
it's initially like, okay, don't do those things. And having that sort of ability in a crit, like to be able to walk through someone who hasn't been racing crits, and like, hey, these are the crit skills you need to learn. Here's the group etiquette, because it's different than group ride etiquette, right? It's
Right.
but racing etiquette and sort of growing on that and watching people develop and gain those skills. And I think a lot of it's been lost through the past couple of years of pandemic racing on Zwift and bike handling being an issue, but a lot of it's just
And it's one
needing
thing to
local crits to
know
come
the
back.
skills, but it's another thing to like do them in a race scenario when things are actually on the line. That's what takes the practice, is to like have that stuff drilled into your brain, where when you're well beyond your threshold, you're still making good decisions. And that's what I think, to kind of like put a positive spin on it. I think more local grassroots consistent racing is how we can sort of like turn the tide on this stuff. I want to take it from there into finish with some predictions for the year. So I'm gonna make a few predictions and get your takes on them and see if you've got any additional ones. But
All right.
my first big one, and we haven't talked gravel much by design, partially because that's not the main thing happening right now. But I don't. Um, I think we've seen peak gravel. I think last year was peak gravel, and I think we're gonna start seeing like the leveling off and maybe like gravel the intensity and fervor around gravel start to taper a little bit.
I give it one more year. I think last year was like the start of peak gravel. So like if you like how you watch a horror movie where
Hmm.
it's like there's one peak sort of like 45 minutes in and then at hour 20 it's like crazy high and then it goes down. I think we're at an hour right now
Right.
and
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
this year's going to be hour 20 and everyone's going to like go
This year's gonna
crazy.
be the M Night
Yeah.
Shyamalan twist.
Right. So I give it this year probably Pete Gravel because Lifetime Grand Prix is adding an event. They added more to it. I'll be curious. It honestly depends on how the media around that goes.
I think
If
Lifetime
it's
Grand Prix is gonna be big, but I
yeah,
don't think it's gonna be as like people aren't gonna care about it as much as they did last year. I think because the coverage they had last year, like flow bikes. Well, one thing is like everyone. I mean, I'm not hating, but it is not fun to just watch a whole gravel race. And
yeah,
then the content that is good from a gravel race is the like YouTube style in-depth and we've seen those stories like a lot of people did really good ones last year
yeah.
and it was kind of like the first Lifetime Grand Prix. I think it's going to be hard to like find a new spin on that for the second year, and I think you're going to see people's attention start to. I don't think it's going to be a precipitous drop, but I think we're going to go from 100 to 90 this year. You know?
Have you seen the YouTube videos for the Lifetime Grand Prix? They're like 30-minute little
Yeah,
mini
yeah.
doc for
They're
each
like
race. Have you
Drive to
seen those at
Survive
all?
style.
Yeah, have
Yeah,
you
yeah,
seen those at all? I
yeah,
think if they lean into that style of production, so they do, like, let's say they do the season opener, release that before the next race and do that, I think it grows. I think like live streaming just doesn't work for a 10
yeah,
hour. I love bike racing. I think it's interesting 90% of the time. I'm not watching that.
yeah.
Um,
I
and
love doing
then
those races,
yeah,
occasionally, but
I've
it's not fun to watch.
yeah. I've
It's
done
not
300.
explosive.
Yeah, I've done like 350-mile races that take 70 hours to do without sleeping, right? Like
Right.
I love all kinds of bike racing and I'm not watching Unbound start to finish. Just not
Yeah.
doing it.
No. Yeah, we're
Um,
we're gonna do a 24-hour race this year, but I will not be live streaming the 24-hour race.
right.
We'll make a an edited down piece of content from that.
Right. And I think that sort of media where it's released after the race, people can watch it, gain a little bit of maybe they introduce some drama or tension from some, but like somehow build a little bit of that's how it grows. Otherwise, it just kind of teeters off.
But I also
Um,
think from a like participant, so there's the like professional side of it where you've got the Ian Boswells, the washed up world tour guys coming over, and then the sort of like hungry to make a name younger people coming up and trying to challenge them or whatever. There's that side of it, but then there's also the participatory side. And I've been saying this for years, but I think this is where we're gonna start to see it. Those races are just so long and so hard. There's only so many of them you can do in a year, and I think we're gonna
yep.
start to see just the toll like physically of those start to wear down. I think the ones that sell out are still going to keep selling out, but I don't think it's going to be like every year in the past there was like Big Sugar is new, Big Sugar sold out. I don't think we're going to see more new big races getting added like at the clip that they were and selling out immediately like they have been. I think this is the year that levels off.
No, I agree with that. I mean, even some of the pro riders have addressed that they've over raced in the past couple of years and it led to
Yeah.
fatigue or whatever, and they're focusing on a condensed calendar of very important races. I'm at I imagine you see that with amateurs as well. And I think you see that not necessarily in gravel exclusively, but in just racing in general as the outside, like the outside sports industry projects a decrease. I think a lot of the COVID enthusiasm for sports and outdoor culture has sort of waned as people
Yep.
get back to the office and all of that. And I think you just see race attendance as a whole
I
go
think this
down.
is
And
a second prediction. What just
yeah,
like in
yeah,
general, like
yeah,
the COVID bubble has burst.
yep,
The the supply chain stuff is going to clear up. Stuff is going to become easier to get. Companies are going to start really eating it. They're going to have to mark things down a ton. And
yep.
also, like, attendance overall may start to wane. Like, bike stuff is just going to find an equilibrium. It kind of been on a general upswing, and it's gonna kind of even itself back out this year.
Yeah, agree.
Um, Another one I think is, and I mentioned this a little bit up top. There's going to be too much professional level racing on the road in America, and we're going to see some very thin fields.
I
I
agree
think
with
that
that as well. Yeah,
NCL is going to struggle to fill out fields, and I wouldn't be surprised if CBR also struggles to fill out fields. So it's going to be interesting to see
yeah,
what like some of the alternative like where the energy goes because I think we will see some events like really flop this year. My prediction is that ACC is going to continue to be kind of the gold standard for um, a consistent through line of bike racing on the road in America. And then I think some of the like Red Bull Bay Climb, I think some of those like alternative events are going to continue to have
yeah.
a lot of steam, like participant wise and interest wise.
Yeah, and I think part of it's going to be like your bay climbs and all of that draw a different kind of crowd. Like they bring professional talent, but it's not the same individuals that you might see racing all the time at ACC, or people who race ACC but aren't at the front of the race may find an avenue to win races at those alternative races that attracts them, right? Um, Yeah, I mean, honestly, like the year we've addressed it earlier is just super saturated. Um, Teams are, I think the NCL is going to draw a different kind of team. It's going to draw your UCI, like pro Connie, like weird, like Central American and South American, Eastern European kind of teams. ACC is still going to be like they have all of the iconic races, all the historic races, the legacy races. They're going to still draw that because sorry, everybody wants to win Athens Twilight. Like that's the
Right.
one.
That's the thing.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
I think that's what CRT, the rumored Legion series, the uphill battle it's going to face is that it is going to be a completely new thing. And
yep,
Lion's Den was able to be like a single event that had a lot of like interest behind it because it was new, but to replicate that across the country on such a short timeline when there are so many other opportunities that are already kind of like a known quantity,
yep,
it may be a tough sell. Also, because if the Legion thing follows the model they set up at Lions Den, that race was kind of all of the teams were wearing like non-sponsor jerseys, so that's going to be like a tough value proposition from smaller teams. They may
yep.
have trouble filling out all of those fields. I don't
I
know.
agree. Um, Honestly, what I imagine is going to happen for CRT, they're going to do the Lions Den model where they said, okay, Boston, you have a team, and they fill it with like a random elite riders, right? And they go, okay, you know, Atlanta, you have a team, they fill it with random riders, right? And that's kind of how they do it because they did it with Lions Den. And it kind of makes sense because of how compact that schedule is. a rider can kind of agree to 6 or 8 weeks to just go and do that, right? As sort of
Yeah.
a, well, it's
So
the
they're
end of
going
the
to be
season, whatever.
they're going to be like composite teams. They're not going to
Yeah.
be they're going to be just like pulling people whose
Yep.
season is already like basically over. See, that's going to compete with gravel though. That's going to start getting into fall when that race is, and that's when a lot of the big gravel races are. And honestly cyclocross too, which my preference would be let's all just race cyclocross in the fall. Everything else needs to take a break for a second.
I agree. So, honey, we're talking about CRT, which is the Legion series in the fall. CBR is going to fill their fields because it's California and it's always
Yeah,
crazy
I
fields
did.
there.
I did make that mistake last week or last podcast,
Yep.
saying CBR when I meant CRT. Too many three-letter acronyms in cycling, but those are two separate series. CBR
Yep.
is the series early season that's happening right now. That's like consistent weekly racing in California. CRT is the new series that has not really been announced yet, but the rumors are pretty solid that Legion is putting on their own race series. It's going to kind of be an extension of that Lions Den race they did a couple of years ago. Hopefully, we're going to get some more news on that in the near future. I would love to do an episode just talking about that. I think there's a
Yep.
lot of meat on that bone once we
Yep.
find out some more details about it.
For sure.
So hopefully we can get into that next episode. If they drop
Yeah.
something, maybe NCL will drop the bomb on us. We
Yeah.
got a
And
couple potential
Matt,
guests on the hook, so
true.
maybe maybe we'll get a guest on next episode or episode after
Yep.
that.
I want to address something. Matt Golson is asking how the NCL is going to draw these UCI teams. Um, and I think it's going to be solely off of it's expensive to do these. And so your average American team that's running off of a budget of, hey, please give us free bikes and a bank that's going to give us 10 grand to go pay entry fees is not going to afford to do it. So you're going to have a team with budget, which for the UCI continental teams come in. And then you think about, okay, which teams need the coverage that an American race with the medalist sports component can bring
Yeah,
them.
they're gonna
And then you're getting
offer
into these, yep,
they're gonna offer like a platform that these UCI level teams from countries that are not America don't have. And
yep,
whether they can fulfill this promise or not, I'm sure they're going to be promising like an extremely high level of what the broadcast is going to be and what the exposure is going to be both locally in the cities that they're in and worldwide. And part of it is just that they're going to actively be shopping those teams. Like I don't think that the ACC has said like, oh, let's fill out our field with
yep.
international teams. Like that's just not where they're shopping. So I think some of it is NCL is just going to be like courting them
Yeah, and I
actively.
think what UCI teams might get out of it, and remember, there's a distinction between your World Tour teams, your pro teams, and your continental teams. These are all UCI level. Like, yeah, we're not going to see Jumbo Visma at NCL. Like, that's not happening. They're
Yeah,
not sending Wout van Aert and Nathan Van Hooydonk to go race in circles in Atlanta. That's not happening.
yep,
But you might see like we mentioned earlier, like that Emmanuel Ibari second bike team or Medellin, there's value for them to come do a race that has proper coverage. And it's that media coverage and exposure that the UCI teams would get out of it.
yeah.
Um,
It's a way for
yeah,
them to race in America, um, and just get their spot. I'm sure it has some level of like prestige to a sponsor, especially.
yeah,
I'm sure part of it is also that the people working on these races, the NCL races, are the same people that used to work on Tour of Colorado, Tour of Utah, so they kind of know who to talk to in those,
yeah,
yeah, 2.2 type teams that race that circuit. They probably just know the right connections of who
yeah,
to talk to over there.
yeah, for sure. And I think we did like if you look at the NCL, who they're tagged in, it's a lot of Spanish speaking countries and Portuguese speaking countries tagging them in posts. So that sort of like the obviously it's not necessarily a predictor, but it sort of lends itself to
Yeah, but why would that
team,
be the case
yeah,
for America,
Spanish
for
speaking
races in
teams.
America? Why would so much of their mentions be abroad?
Right. And so that's sort of where we're not throwing this out of thin air. That's sort of like an optic situation where we're digging a little bit and seeing there's a lot of Spanish and Portuguese speaking teams talking about the NCL or organizations or whatever. And so that's sort of where we're getting this from.
Yep. Well, hopefully we're gonna have some more news on NCL. They're gonna have to start trickling some stuff out for us to talk about. We're
Yep.
gonna plan to do another one of these in 2 weeks. Keep doing them on that interval. Try to keep them pretty consistent. Racing is just gonna start coming even more fast and furious at us as we ramp up. Valley of the Sun will
Yep.
have already happened by the next one. We'll have plenty of stuff to talk about. Ben, you got anything else before we sign off?
No, I mean that covers it. Thanks everyone for watching,
Yeah.
listening if you're on a podcast platform, and
Oh yeah,
appreciate it.
share it with people, like and subscribe, all the stuff that people say. I need to get better about saying that stuff up top. I'm terrible
Um,
at YouTube from
yeah.
that perspective.
Leave a review on whatever platform you watch. A five
Yes.
star review is like it pushes it out like crazy. So we'd appreciate it if you are watching. Just drop that little 5 star review. Even if you are lying about a 5 star review, just drop it.
Also, just share it with your riding buddies so
Yeah.
that if you've watched it, you need them to know what you're talking about. So just
Yep.
send it to them, and then you can talk about the same stuff. You'll be on the same page. But thanks everybody for watching and listening. We'll see you guys next time.
Yep.
Appreciate it, everybody.